We acknowledge the Wadawurrung people as the traditional owners of land, waterways and skies, and who to this day practice their culture and uphold the dignity of their ancestors. We pay our respects to their elders past and present. We acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are part of our Greater Geelong community today. Welcome everyone. We can see you coming in. There were 32 people who registered to be here tonight, and I think half of you are in already. Welcome to the webinar on the Pakington Street North part of the Pakington Street and Gordon Avenue Urban Design Framework, or in shorthand, the UDF. Now, this project began in April 2018 when community members came together to work on what Pakington Street and Gordon Avenue should look like in the future, taking a longer term perspective of what people did there, what did the place look like, and how did people feel being there. Now, the preferred future described at that first gathering was a desire for Pakington Street and Gordon Avenue to be a vibrant, compact and thriving urban village. So it sounds pretty simple, but behind those words sit a lot of things that mattered to the community, matter today, and also are about the values. A place of inclusion, a village that showcases universal design to ensure everyone can access local attractions, services and businesses, offering plenty of opportunities for all to participate and contribute to the vibrant street life and community life. A place of opportunities, a village that provides a variety of spaces and places to rest, reflect and socialise that are comfortable, attractive, relaxing and safe. There's always something happening with plenty of community events showcasing local design, culture and businesses. A place for people, streetscapes that allow for the integration of varied transport modes while providing enough room for activities. The green leafy trees provide shade and comfort, helping to create a healthy, safe and attractive urban life. It's a big deal. Now, during tonight's webinar, you'll hear from panelists on the thinking and processes of developing and implementing a UDF. And what we're going to be looking at is why a UDF is needed for the area and how decisions are actually made in relation to what is included in the UDF, what a UDF can do, and importantly, or as important, what it can't do. Changes made from the interim to the final UDF, the strategic drivers that also influence what happens. So these are the strategies, plans and policies that influence decisions, and how a UDF is actually implemented. The panel will also, as we go through this agenda, the panel will also address the questions that you submitted via the Have Your Say page. And to those of you who did, we thank you very, very much. What we did with the questions was similar questions that were submitted. They were grouped together, and then one or two were chosen that were reflective of the sentiment of the other questions in the group, if you like. So during the webinar, as you know, you've got the chat function. Please use it to make your comments, to maybe add some more questions. And Leela Farahani, who's the coordinator of urban design, and Shweti Ravashankar, the senior urban designer, and I will keep an eye on these and try to address them during our time together tonight. So I'm saying the word trying and I'm underlying it because sadly, it'll be all effort, but we cannot promise that we will get to every one of the comments or questions during the evening, because we have a pretty, the agenda is pretty full and packed with questions already. I would like to say though that the webinar is only one part of the engagement program. being able to discuss questions and being curious about what the UDF is about. This will be addressed in face-to-face with the walk and talks in the neighbourhoods, in your neighbourhoods, which are being scheduled for Saturday, the 27th of August and Sunday, the 28th. So like humans love the face-to-face, and also walking and talking with people is a great way to address any of your cares and concerns, and also to get answers from the team. So I'll put these details up at the end of the webinar. And of course, you can also, you've probably gathered by now, having submitted questions, that you can add your thoughts and ideas and complete a survey online. So let me introduce you to the panelists. We have someone who creates the UDF. This is Dr. Jonathan Daly and his team. Jonathan is the Manager of Urban Design and Heritage and is a city design champion. He has experience working across urban design, architecture and planning in Europe, North America and Australasia. He received his PhD in urban design from the University of Melbourne and has led the design, urban design and heritage team of the city for the past 2 years. So welcome, Jonathan. And so Jonathan's in the business of creating the UDF. We have someone else here who's in the business of implementing the UDF. And this is Peter Smith. He is the coordinator of strategic implementation. He has extensive strategic planning experience in state and local government and has been with the city since 2004. He has been responsible for managing and implementing a range of strategic planning projects and strategies, urban design frameworks and structure plans across Greater Geelong, with a focus on implementing them into the planning scheme. So welcome to you both. Peter, can we start with you? Why is a UDF needed for the area, particularly the Pakington North Precinct?
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Linda. So yeah, I'm talking as a strategic planner. I haven't been overly involved in this project so far, but got a pretty good understanding of it and how these things can play out and help an area. So in answer to your question, the general answer is that there's a lack of specific built form controls in this Pakington Street North and other parts of Pakington Street and Gordon Avenue. This urban design framework is focused on the commercial zones. So when we look at the northern end of Pakington Street, we're mainly talking about currently it's a commercial 2 zone. There's the mixed use zone at the shopping centre, but generally it's commercial 2. And that's not really a zone that has much control in terms of built form. So it's a generic state government zone. We do have some broad policy that gives direction on increasing housing in these areas that are known as increased housing diversity areas. So they tend to be within walking distance of activity centres and railway stations. So Pakington Street is an increased housing diversity area. So we've got broad policy sort of encouraging housing in the area. There are some planning provisions at the state level that provide direction on applications for multi-dwellings and apartments. So that's at clause 55 and 58 of the planning scheme. So it's not completely devoid of guidance if someone does apply for apartments, but without an urban design framework, this precinct is at risk of inappropriate development. There's not really any specific height limits for a start. The current planning scheme controls along the commercial zone strip, which is basically just the commercial 2 zone. There's a couple of properties, or a handful of properties with heritage overlays. So they have some specific protection around heritage, but there's not much in the way of built form. So there's a lack of height limits. There's nothing specific in terms of overshadowing, privacy, retention of heritage and character, and how we actually balance up all those competing objectives when we deal with development. And yeah, so there's a transition. The EDS provides some direction on, heights along that strip, starting from the 2-storey in the heritage area of Pakington Street, rising up to around the 6 to 8 stories up at the northern end. So yeah, it's really specific local controls and a vision for the area. That's why a UDF's needed.
Okay, so that's why it's particularly important to this area. What can a UDF do and what can't it do?
Yeah, I think I've touched on a little bit of...
People sometimes get a bit thinking about planning and thinking it's all encompassing. And so as this slide shows, a UDF does stuff and it doesn't do other things. So can you actually add on that?
Yeah, no, like in general, it's a plan for a specific urban area. So in this case, it's as I said, it's focused on those commercial zones along Gordon Avenue and Pakington Street. It's not trying to provide long-term direction for the residential areas as much. It's really quite specific about that urban strip that it's focused on, and it's really important planning and urban design tool that assists local planning authorities and their communities in setting an overall direction for the area, and then provides guidance on local actions and initiatives that can help implement that vision and that direction. So it's also about, where governments can focus their investment. These sort of plans of bringing together all the future directions are really important for investment as well as just making planning decisions. But I guess from my point of view, the primary role of the UDF is to basically start to develop development outcomes or specifying the built form controls that are needed for an area. So it doesn't actually put controls in place itself. That comes later, which I'll talk about later. But it provides the material and information that will inform planning controls that we eventually put into the planning scheme. And those controls will be what new development gets assessed against. So that's what it does in general. It doesn't do things like address individual developments or architectural styles. It doesn't resolve all the parking, congestion type of issues. It doesn't produce detailed designs that you can go and construct streetscape works from, for instance. And it's not really, it's not about construction or project management of capital works projects. There's a whole stack of stuff that flows from a UDF. It's the sort of the first step in a number of plans and procedures that need to be implemented.
Okay. Just to everybody, we're using the Q&A, not the chat. I do apologise. So, and also, Peter, if I could just take you back, Jordan has asked a question. Can you please clarify what the orange dots are on this plan? I'm assuming that he's referring to the plan before. Are they heritage properties?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'll look those up there.
Sweetie, could you take that back? The slide back. Thank you.
Yeah, those properties have a heritage overlay, the ones with the orange dot.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
It's in that area there. Yeah, it's mainly mixed use commercial too, and there's a transport zone that applies to the railway land. So yeah, it doesn't have much in the way of overlays. So normally we'd use something like a design and development overlay to implement the UDF. So it's relatively weak in that respect.
Thank you. Jordan, I hope that resolves that question for you. Don't forget, everyone, use the Q&A, please. That's fantastic. We've got that going well now. Right, Peter. Now, we had some questions, and given what you have just outlined on what a UDF can do and what it can't do, we might look at the two issues that have and associated questions submitted by community members, okay? Now, the first one is linked to greening. Greening the area within the UDF, which the community member commends, particularly the potential to mitigate any contribution to urban heating from the proposed development. Green leafy trees providing shade and comfort, helping to create a healthy, safe and attractive urban village is part, as we said at the beginning, of the original vision. The concern from this questionnaire is around the details of how greening will be realised. So the greening is there, we can see it, and it's spoken about in the UDF, but how will it be realised? They ask, if a detailed landscape plan has in fact been prepared. Now, just going on from that, there was a similar related question, and I will bring this one in now. Another questioner asks whether landscaping will be a mandatory component of planning applications. What criteria will be used to assess the suitability of plant choice to ensure that it will provide a transition to low-scale residential areas? How will landscaping be maintained and how will this be regulated? So it's all about the greening and the landscaping. Where does landscaping fit in with the UDF and its implementation? If you can explain.
Yeah, I'll have to give sort of fairly generic answers a little because I'm not 100% across this particular situation, but the UDF, basically to implement the UDF, there's a number of further detailed work that needs to be prepared. And I expect that will include something akin to a landscape plan for the public realm, maybe a streetscape plan, and I'm sure Jonathan will be able to fill you in further on that. And that's where you really get down to plant species and all the individual landscape type of treatments that might be appropriate in the public realm. I believe the UDF does provide some direction on the overall greening of the area. So that's the public realm. In terms of private, there's new development proposals. I'd expect that even under the current controls, we'd require a landscape plan to be submitted as part of a planning permit application, but we would most likely strengthen that requirement in any design and development overlays that we apply along this precinct to implement the UDF. So basically, there would be a plan submitted with an application that would be assessed by our council, landscape architects and people who manage the public realm. So yeah, a lot of stuff comes later. It's not all done at this level. It sort of drills down as we implement it. That's the general answer to that question, Linda.
Yes, thank you. Now, this second question, which sort of falls into the can and cannot do, and it is about whether additional car parking is going to be created to compensate for the car parks lost to build a park in Waratah Street. And the concern is that the Woolworths car park is already full most of the time. There's a concern that developments may be approved on the assumption that residents and retail customers can make use of the Woolworths car park for their parking needs, and that parents and teachers will have nowhere to park. So it's a parking concern. So where does parking fit in with the UDF?
Yeah, I can't answer that. That's quite a specific question. We'd need to, research that a bit further. The one about the Woolworths car park and all, the question. But yeah, typically, what would happen as part of the UDF, there'd be some initial traffic assessments done to help inform the plan. But I believe that, which I believe has occurred here, but there needs to be a more detailed car parking plan prepared for this precinct, which I understand is the Pakington Street public parking plan is currently underway. So once again, the UDF provides direction, and there's further local traffic management plans and public parking plans produced as an outcome of the UDF. It's probably the extent of what I could say for now.
Okay, so again, it's part of that further work done before implementation, or as part of that broader implementation.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Linda, I might jump in.
Yes, of course.
Just in terms of, I understand that some of the residents have got sort of very specific questions about specific sites, and we can't say how those sites will develop in the future. So the Strand site, we don't know if that site will ever develop in the future, or what proposal will come forward. But the issue of car parking would be dealt with as part of any planning application related to that site. So the demand for parking, there's parking rates that set out the number of parking spaces that need to be provided for different land use. That would all be assessed as part of a planning application, as it would for every single site that develops over the course of the next 10, 20 years.
Okay. All right. Which, Jonathan, brings us to you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you for that. And you don't get away. You don't get to go and make a cup of tea because you come back at the end. So please stay with us. Jonathan, for you, what drove the development of the UDF? So we've gone through this process since 2018. What were the drivers? And have they in fact changed?
I'll come off mute. There's a number of different factors that we've considered in the development of the UDF. Obviously, we're looking at population growth. We're looking at housing issues, demand for housing, different types of housing. We're looking at the need to provide greater housing diversity that improves housing affordability, that enables local people to stay in the area. So younger people that are coming onto the housing market, but also people throughout their lifespan, because we want to try and provide or enable people to both upsize and downsize at different stages of their life. And we're also looking to provide for the people that want to come in and live in these areas too, that are attracted to live in places like Geelong West. There's also a very strong local economic aspect that we've considered. So there's a council endorsed retail strategy that looks at the demand for retail space in all of the across the whole of the municipality, and there is demand for increased floor space in Geelong West, including a demand for an increase in the diversity of offerings for different types of businesses. And this is important because it helps to create employment within these areas. It brings vibrancy, improves access to shopping and services, and so on for people that live there and for future populations as well. And that all contributes to the sustainability, the future sustainability of the local economy. And sort of building on that idea of sustainability is the environmental sustainable component as well. There's a pressing need to address the impacts of climate change. And it's been proven over and over that higher density, mixed use development, where we bring people, residential development closer to sort of the destinations and attractions that people are seeking to get to, we reduce the need to travel longer distances. We reduce the need to use private cars. For most people, of course, some people still need access by car, but we can significantly reduce access by or travel by private car. So if you live closer to those destinations, of course, you're less likely to drive. And that's an important contribution to addressing climate change. COVID has definitely shown us in terms of what's changed since we began this process. It's shown us the importance of living locally and the importance of having easy access to key services, to important amenities like our parks and gardens, particularly the natural environment, and also the reconnection, I think, in many ways with small businesses. So it's helping to support a stronger local economy again. And, I think objectively, I can state objectively that this precinct needs revitalisation. I think it's very, very difficult to argue otherwise. You only have to walk the street to see it, to see the vacant buildings, to see the blank and inactive frontages. And the streetscape is in need of upgrading. We're very aware of this. It's quite a barren streetscape. We want to see it greener. We want to improve the quality of the public realm for all users of that street. So really the UDF is really seeking to bring to life the area for both existing and new residents. And much of this is the things I've just mentioned. It's been borne out in discussions that we've had with the community, the wider community, over the last 4+ years. where there's a strong desire to realise the potential of this precinct, and indeed all of the precincts that were part of the overall UDF. But of course, each has got a very different approach.
I'm just looking at this slide and thinking about the population, the COVID, climate change, economics, all of the things that you are juggling here. How do you manage all of these interests and not actually lose what people love about the area? How does the decision making come about? Very challenging.
It's very, very challenging. I mean, we're trying to mediate between many different interests, different needs, different desires for how an area might develop. Ultimately, we have to arrive at an outcome that will stand up to the rigor of a public hearing. So when it goes to the state, the state government, we have to propose something that is reasonably solid in terms of our decision making. So, quite often we get asked the question by different communities in the municipality, why don't we get to choose what the building heights are? And it simply doesn't work that way. We base the building heights in terms of, there's a number of different factors that we consider. We look at our strategies for population growth. We look at the retail strategies. We're trying to achieve a certain demand for floor space for different land uses. But at the same time, we're also trying to consider the needs of the people that live there. We're trying to protect existing residential from overlooking. We're trying to protect solar access. We're trying to protect the character of the area in a way that still enables development, because otherwise these areas will regress rather than develop and progress and remain sustainable. So we propose a number of controls that try to respond to that existing character. And like I said, while that necessitates an increase in density, we're also seeking to protect a number of different values that the community hold very dearly, that we all do. Those things that I mentioned, but also the protection of existing and provision of new open spaces in the public realm. We have also, we do listen to the community, and we do make changes and adapt the UDF as we have done from the draft to the interim through to the final.
And actually that's, I know that there will be great interest in the changes that you have made between the interim and the final UDF. So if you could just explain them, but also include why they were made, what was the thinking behind it for those changes to actually be made. Just before you start, please keep those questions coming in the queue, your comments coming in the Q&A. Some of them we are going to cover later on, and then we'll come back to them. So the changes between the interim and the final.
Yeah, so you can see on the slide, this is the northern precinct, and these are the changes which you can see from the draft through the interim through to the final. A number of changes have been made to building heights in certain pockets, and we've also so the heights have gradually come down through that process as we've refined the UDF. We've also refined the transition in terms of our response to the residential interfaces. So we have listened to those concerns of residents in those areas that abut the sites with additional height, and we've been gradually reducing heights in certain areas or improving that protection between the proposed higher development and the existing lower rise residential. So you can see on the slide that you're seeing at the moment is what is the final UDF, where we have reduced heights in a number of areas. So there was some concern, for example, about the Strand site and the heights. We reduced the maximum height on that site from 8 to 6. There was also concern about these are the two larger strategic sites in the Northern Precinct, the railway sidings. We reduced that from what was previously a maximum of 10 is now a maximum of 8. And another important interface, which is between that site, the railway sidings, and those residential properties on Waterloo Street, we have further reduced the heights from 6 on a portion of that block from 6 down to 4 stories, and also extended the setbacks as well. So this slide that you're seeing is just showing you those changes that were made to specific, I guess, more sensitive residential interfaces.
Okay.
So I think, do we have one more slide?
No.
I think you're right. I think we're actually on to the questions. How did the City of Greater Geelong arrive at the decision to introduce 8-storey buildings on Pakington Street as part of the UDF?
So the scale of development proposed in the final UDF was based on changing economic conditions, the infill requirements of council's adopted settlement strategy. So the settlement strategy proposes that 50% of all future population growth would be urban infill, which is an approach we're taking to all of urban Geelong, not just to Geelong West. So we're looking at those sites that are best able to accommodate that kind of density or those heights. And we've undertaken testing against the criteria that we spoke about before, and it was understood that 8-storey developments would have the least impact on the heritage core and residential hinterland, because it's located adjacent to the railway tracks, so that it doesn't have those sensitive interfaces with existing residential development. And as I also mentioned previously, we're trying to strike that balance between it's the needs of the community, but also the development potential of those sites. They have to be viable developments, otherwise we wouldn't be able to meet the demand that exists for housing and for retail and so on.
Jonathan, I've got a question here from a couple of people about explaining the change in the interfaces. Do you want to take that now or later?
We can take that now.
It's simply about, could you explain more about the change, explain the change in the interfaces?
I thought we did cover that. I'm not sure what more I could explain.
Okay, well, I'll wait to see if anybody else actually adds more.
Maybe we can come back at the end if there's, if someone whoever asked the question, if they could maybe just flesh it out a little bit.
Yes, that would be okay. We'll do that. All right. This next question from a community member says, Pakington Street is a desirable destination with its heritage houses and village charm. Some people fear the appeal of the village and destination will be lost through overdevelopment. Why is council not building on the appeal and success of the heritage core and this I think relates to a number of questions that have been raised in the Q&A. Building on the appeal and success of the Heritage Core by extending the two-storey building heights northward to the start of the rail yard side.
It's a good question, and there's a number of different things to consider. One would be, I mean, obviously with the Heritage Core, we put in place, in that precinct, we put in place protections to ensure that there is no future development, there's no more than 2 stories. So really seeking to protect what's special about that area. But in terms of the Northern Precinct, it has a different character to the Heritage Core. And although we in terms of the 2-story scale, we do seek to retain that 2-story scale by introducing in the form of what we call a street wall. So we continue that street wall through the Northern Precinct with setbacks at that upper level, which then allow for increased development above that. And that's a very tried and tested approach to retaining that kind of character. If we were to limit the Northern Precinct to 2 stories, we couldn't possibly meet the requirements, the demand for retail and the demand for residential in these areas.
Okay. A community member has focused on the 3D model of Pakington North, and everyone should go and have a play on it. It's very informative, and acknowledges that it includes the shadowing that will occur due to the building development on Pakington Street itself. There are a number of comments on the Q&A now in regard to overshadowing, so this is fortuitous. The question raised, however, relates to the impact of shadowing on the streets of residential houses behind the proposed buildings, given council has acknowledged that some overshadowing will in fact occur. So the member asked, when will full details of this overshadowing be made publicly available? And if this modelling has not been done, why not? So if you could address that question, but also perhaps talk about shadowing in the area a little broader as well.
Yeah, so just to clarify, that the testing has already been done. It was done prior to this round of engagement. It was done for the interim, and it was done for the final UDF. And those videos we made available on the How You Say page. So the community could go and observe the impact of the testing. So in terms of the modelling for overshadowing, it was done prior to arriving at the interface responses, including the setbacks detailed out in the final UDF. So we've used the approach, the requirement to provide 5 hours of sunlight in the spring equinox. So that's in line with state legislation, state policy. And further, we've also laid an emphasis on ensuring solar access to footpaths between 11 and 2 p.m. at the spring equinox. So there'll always be some overshadowing to some degree. But the community can use the 3D model via the Have Your Say page, and you can actually see the impact of overshadowing on the adjacent residential. And you can look at that at different times of the day, different days across the year.
There's also a question about FAR, which of course is the floor area ratio. So total floor areas of buildings to total area of the site. Firstly, can you explain more about FARs, when they are used and what they allow?
Yeah, so it's is a little bit of a challenge because it's a very specific built form control. It's fair to say that it's not one that's widely applied, but for the community, it actually offers more protection in terms of development, because what it ultimately does is it manages the amount of development on a specific site. They typically only apply to the larger, more strategic sites, because we never want to see those sites fully built out. We want to ensure that development in those sites, if you like, is more broken up, that there's a provision of open space and a greater consideration of the public realm within those sites. So we would also, in doing that, we would be ensuring that there's permeability and connectivity to and through those sites. So the floor area ratios, they provide clear guidance on the expected, what we call it, the typology, the type and the scale of new developments. So it's there to ensure a response that really responds to the site itself and to its surrounding area. So the FARs, as mentioned, they typically apply to very large sites that have significant development potential, and particularly ones that are transitioning from a former single use. So for example, the railway sidings that we would like to see developed into something, more of a mixed use site with residential and maybe some retail or commercial land uses as well. And they're often combined with other built form controls. So for example, site coverage. So I mentioned before that we, in order to break up a site and to provide open space, we set requirements that you can't develop the entire space. You can't develop 100%. You might develop 60% or 80% of that site. And that enables us to deliver new public parks, new public spaces. But we also combine it with the building height and also setbacks. And in doing so, this allows for a greater variation in terms of the actual development itself. So I think one of the questions I think that comes up quite a lot is, why aren't certain controls mandatory? Why is there an element of why are they discretionary? And the simple answer to that is, if we are too prescriptive with built form controls, we're going to end up with development that's very monotonous and not very responsive to its local environment. We have to allow for some degree of creativity in the response that we get back from the architects and designers of these spaces. And that's been proven to deliver better outcomes. So FARs have a number of different benefits. I've already alluded to some of those in terms of responding to the qualities of a site, and the variation in terms of the building outcome, provision of additional open space, new streets, new laneways, improved permeability and connectivity. They really help to manage the level of development on these major sites so that we can achieve those goals in terms of population growth and jobs and retail and so on, but also to ensure that there's not overdevelopment as well and inappropriate development. And ultimately, FARs really help provide greater certainty, both for a developer and for the community as well.
There's a specific side to that question in its second part. Will minimum setbacks and building height levels stated in the UDF still have to be abided by? And the example given is that the UDF states that the Pakington Strand site has building heights of 4 and 6 stories and a site coverage of 60%. The stated FAR is 3.6. Does the application of the FAR mean that the building of taller heights could be built on that site? Quite specific question.
Yeah, good question. So the proposed FARs for the two strategic sites are determined by, it's a combination of the building height and the site coverage control. So you effectively multiply the two together. So although the building heights and site coverage are preferred maximums or discretionary, the FARs are actually mandatory.
Okay.
And the minimum setbacks, the transition to sensitive uses and interface with the public realm will remain important criteria to adhere to and form a key component of the permit application assessment.
Okay. Green roofs and green walls in building design are not mentioned in the UDF. This the questioner points out. The questioner further states that green roofs and buildings can significantly mitigate urban heat in urban canyons, and their concern is that higher buildings envisaged for the top end of Pakington Street potentially create a heat tunnel. How does the council intend to ensure building design that incorporates green roofs and walls in the precinct?
So we have a number of different policies that all come into play when applications are being assessed. The city has an adopted position in terms of green roofs and greening in general, which is called the Urban Forest Strategy. That's available online for anyone to go and look at, which not only outlines canopy cover targets for the city, it also provides clear guidance in terms of the incorporation of green walls, green roofs, garden beds, etc., mostly within the public realm. And so while the UDF doesn't specifically mandate these things, this kind of landscaping, a landscape plan has to be submitted with all planning applications for these kinds of developments. And that would be assessed as part of the permit application process. And anyone that's had a look at the model will get a sense of the kind of greening that we're aiming for Pakington Street.
Okay. This one relates to the UDF's recommendation that plant and services, this is like air conditioners be designed and located to minimise any potential noise, visual or height impact on nearby residents. The community member asks what controls will be included in the UDF to protect the impact of this to residents.
Okay, so rooftop terraces and cooling towers on the top of new buildings are not considered as additional stories according to the Victorian planning scheme. So a story is that part of a building between floor levels. If there's no floor above, it is the part between the floor level and the ceiling. It may include an attic, basement, built over car parking area or mezzanine. That being said, often buildings locate ancillary services such as plant, etc., away from the building edge or incorporate them as a design feature that doesn't appear as an eyesore. And certainly when we assess planning applications, that's something that we are very strong on in terms of what we would require from a new development.
Thank you, Jonathan. Peter, we're back to you now. So Jonathan outlined the changes driving the development of the UDF. Can you now talk to everyone about the strategic drivers? These are those approved strategies, policies and plans that influence how an area grows and develops. Tell us about the strategic drivers, which here is page 18 of the UDF, and their implications to what happens.
Yep, sure, Linda, I can do that. So yeah, there's a number of different strategies and plans in that slide up at the moment. They're all local ones. So there's also, it's just worth knowing, there's a lot of, in the planning scheme, there's a lot of state and regional policy that helps give direction as well. But in terms of these local strategies and plans, the three that I would probably focus on from my point of view as a planner, they're actually part of the planning scheme. It's the settlement strategy. So that's a really important document that we've implemented into the planning scheme. It sets a whole stack of long-term policy for Greater Geelong. It basically directs where we want the growth to occur. Not so much related to Pakington Street, but it did things like redirect a lot of future growth away from the Bellarine Peninsula to these two large new growth areas to the north and west of Geelong. So that's a big strategic move for the city. So yeah, Greater Geelong, it's been about this for some time, but we allow outward expansion, so what's called greenfields development, to accommodate a lot of new housing and population growth. And we also try to encourage greater density within existing suburbs. So the settlement strategy sets a very ambitious target of trying to accommodate 50% of the new dwellings that are required within as infill, so within established areas. So that's why we're starting to look at, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons we need to start to look at some of these suburbs and areas that are well located for more density, and try to create some appropriate planning controls to guide how that density can occur. So yeah, I see the settlement strategy is probably one of the most important specific strategies that directs the UDF. There's a housing diversity strategy which has been in place for some time. It basically sets up our housing policy for the municipality. That's where we first put in place this concept of increased housing diversity areas within walking distance of activity centres and railway stations, and we've changed residential zones and commercial zones to try to encourage development in those areas. There's also the retail strategy. This is also a retail strip along Pakington Street, so that's quite a new strategy, gives direction for where we need additional floor space, what sort of retail markets are coming on board in the future and where they can be accommodated. So that's another relevant one. It's also, the social housing plan is also quite an important document as well. It's basically council's policy for increasing social and affordable housing. So whenever we do change planning controls or implement, I guess, residential type of strategies, we're starting to try to incorporate a requirement for the social housing contribution. There's a question about that which I can talk about later. But yeah, fundamentally, a big driver is trying to accommodate population growth and not just having it all as greenfields, new suburbs, to try to appropriately increase the density across the established neighbourhoods. It's probably the main one of those drivers that I'd like to focus on.
Okay. How does it happen, Peter?
Okay.
What's the next steps? As in, how does the implementation process actually go?
Yeah, it's fine. I can talk to that.
Yeah.
So eventually, or hopefully, we'll get this full Pakington Street urban design framework adopted by council. So it's a council resolution, and then that sets up a number of things. I'll talk about how it gets into the planning scheme and becomes a seriously entertained bit of planning that actually has effect on decisions soon. But at page 111 of the UDF, there's a list of implementation measures. So there's things like, and we've touched on a few of these tonight. I'll talk about the planning scheme amendment, but there's further detailed assessments required to help implement the UDF. One is an infrastructure capacity assessment. We need to see if we can work out some mechanisms so we can get developers to contribute to infrastructure upgrades. And so to do that, you need some evidence and facts and figures that you can put into controls or agreements with developers so they contribute to improvements in the area. We also do need to do some environmental assessments, so particularly to do with soil contamination. The state government's very strict on, if we change the zone of land to a zone that allows sensitive uses, we need to make sure that there's not issues around contamination. So that's probably more applicable to places like Gordon Avenue. It will definitely apply to the rail yard siting, but that doesn't seem to be, there's no actual proposals there at the moment. So yeah, there's environmental assessments, infrastructure capacity, parking plans we mentioned before, master plans for the streetscape plans. So there's a whole stack of implementation along those lines. And then the bit that my team's responsible for is what's called a planning scheme amendment. So we're effectively amending the planning scheme to implement the outcomes of the UDF. So that'll be in terms of some local policy in the scheme, but more directly through applying overlays and rezoning some land in this precinct. So basically, once the UDF's adopted by council, we prepare a planning scheme amendment which shows the changes to the planning scheme, the draft controls. We have to get the state government Minister for Planning to authorise us to proceed with putting it out for public exhibition. So there's a full public exhibition process. It's all under the Planning and Environment Act, so it's a statutory process. People who's affected or who has an interest can make a submission. As a planning authority, we have to consider all the submissions. We report to council on the submissions, and normally, if we can't resolve them all, which we often can't because people often want things to change it where we have a different idea as to what an appropriate outcome might be. So we don't always agree with the changes, but if that's the case, we have to put it to an independent panel. So a planning panel, which is normally 2 or 3 experts appointed by the Minister for Planning, who conduct a hearing and listen to all the submitters, any expert evidence that's submitted, listen to all the arguments, and then they provide independent recommendations back to council on the proposal, on the amendment. And then it goes to council for adoption, and then it goes back to the Minister for Planning for approval. And once it's approved and gazetted, that's when the actual changes occur in the planning scheme. And that's when all this, all these new guidelines and controls that we've been talking about actually have effect. And they basically, any development applications have to address the new controls. And that amendment process can take up to 18 months. So it's not a fast process. We're changing subordinate legislation, which is the planning scheme. So it's not something you can do quickly and easily. You have to go through a serious process. So yeah, that'll be another opportunity for people to have their say as part of this planning proposal.
So there's a few extra opportunities for people to actually have their say in a more formal way.
Yeah, what we call the public exhibition of the amendment is really when it all happens. And we normally have to go to council 3 times as well. So each time we report to council, we do that transparently, and the agenda papers are published, so that there's sort of an opportunity for people to ask questions of council, etc. as well. But the main sort of opportunity is through making a submission, and then if they want to take it to a panel hearing, they can put their case to an independent panel as well.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take you back to landscaping again. This questioner cites the UDF's encouragement of integrating landscape as a key driver of building design, and to provide rear landscape setbacks at interfaces to sensitive residential areas to manage the transition to low-scale residential areas, and asks, how will council manage the landscaping? For example, will there be mandatory component of planning applications? What criteria will be used to assess the suitability of plant choice to ensure that it will provide a transition? And how will this landscaping be maintained, and how will this be regulated?
Yeah, there's a bit in that question.
Yes. I think you have covered half of it.
Yeah. Like if we're talking about something that, I don't fully understand the context, but if it's landscaping that would be required as part of a private development, for want of a better term, and someone applies for a planning permit, then it's required through. Sorry. that sound went a bit strange. And it's required through conditions on a planning permit for something like a landscape plan to be submitted. That gets reviewed by our internal experts who know what species are appropriate for the job at hand. And then it really, it comes down to it's responsibility of the person doing the development and I guess living there eventually to maintain it. Enforcement isn't that strong, I guess, to follow up on landscaping, but it can be if it's a significant area and people complain about it, we would do enforcement, but I'm not going to pretend that we're out there checking, every bit of landscaping that's ever been approved in a planning permit, but there's definitely an intent there to, encourage landscaping in the private realm. If it's a public realm question, then that's quite different. The council manages the streets and the public planting, so I'm not.
Yes, the landscaping though isn't part of the UDF, is it?
No, not to that level of detail. No.
So all of this, it's another one of the what can and cannot do. Is that correct? Would you say that?
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah.
Okay, I think something along those lines. Good. I think it's the final one for you. We have a question here around the process for increasing social and affordable housing. The questioner states that Geelong desperately needs more housing in central high amenity areas, and social and affordable housing is an important part of the housing mix. So great, they state that the plans propose higher density development. The issue, however, is a concern about why are you taxing those investing in new housing stock in such areas via a social housing levy? So does this levy mean developers cut expenditure on quality architecture, or does new development become unviable? Why isn't social housing funded by everyone, or at least by taxing those things that we want less?
Yep, no, I can answer that. So, as I said, the council's got a social housing plan. There's also state government guidance around how we deal with social and affordable housing in the planning system. It's not that strong as yet from the state government, to be honest. It could be much clearer and more simple, but generally we're encouraged to try to increase the amount of social and affordable housing as part of new development. So we've done our own, evaluations of what appropriate contributions would be. So there's a company called SGS Economics who have done a lot of work on this for the City of Greater Geelong. We're starting to implement it as part of these individual planning projects. So the general proposition is that I think it's something like there's a need for housing to be provided as social and affordable housing. So SGS's theory is we divide that up between the Commonwealth, the state and local government. So it boils down to around 4%, I think it is, that 4.6% that we need to try to capture as part of the planning process at the local government level. So those formulas work out, like you mentioned a particular dollar figure, but it's basically what we're seeking. It's not a tax, it's a contribution of a certain percentage, which is it's around 4% of new housing is to be social housing, or it can be provided as cash or a combination of both. So that's fairly typical in planning. Some sites may not be appropriate or be able to accommodate social housing, or the ratio might come out that you can only, the requirement is to contribute 1.5 dwellings, so you can't give half a dwelling, so you might provide one dwelling and then the other half is cash. So it's the idea is we eventually get more social housing being provided directly built on site, or we start collecting contributions and then find appropriate locations to build it through an affordable housing trust. So that's how we're trying to move forward in both the new suburbs, the greenfields areas, but also in these infill areas. We're trying to achieve our social housing plan.
Okay. And that's the end of the presentation and the questions so far. Before we just go to the final things, is there anything else that you, Jonathan, or you, Peter, would like to add or stress to the people online?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things I think are really important. I've just been reading through the questions. I'm trying to sort of answer a number of them in two parts. I think it's, some of the questions relate to, why can't it be 2 stories instead of 4, instead of 6, instead of whatever it might be. Just going back to what I mentioned at the start, we could say all of Geelong West will be 2 stories, and it'll go to the state government, and the state government will say there's absolutely no logic to that, and we'd be overruled, because there will also be strong proponents that will put forward a good case why there should be additional height in certain locations, such as the ones that we proposed. The other is that there's been, I noticed a number of sort of questions in relation to what different people perceive to be, when I say perceive, I'm not discounting, they may well be very bad design outcomes that have happened in the past in this area. And I'm going back to, I guess, a point that Peter covered at the start. The reason that those outcomes have occurred is because we don't have strong enough design policy in place to prevent them. So in order to prevent that happening in the future, we need the UDF endorsed, and we need the planning scheme amendment to be completed, so that we have that policy, and then we can enforce and deliver better design outcomes for the community.
Just one thing, let's say, Linda, that's occurred to me when we're talking about building heights. The numbers that are on the plan, they're maximum or preferred maximum heights. It doesn't mean that every single site is going to be able to achieve those sort of heights. That's as high as that's our preferred maximum. But often, say with a smaller site, if you're trying to achieve the overshadowing or the setbacks or the other built form controls, it's not always going to be possible that every single new building is actually going to get up to the maximum. So it's just worth noting that they are maximum building heights, and there's no maximums at the moment, and we're not seeing every site along Pakington Street popping up at, I don't know, 10 or 12 stories. So maybe that risk increases as the desirability of development becomes more desirable, but yeah, it's just they are maximum, so it's worth noting. Doesn't mean it'll all get to that level.
Anything else? Any other comments that you would make?
From my point of view, no.
Hey?
No, nothing from me.
Okay, I'm going to give a last question to the Q&As, as Jonathan said, we go through and we can hear, there are things raised that have been raised before. So I'm going to concentrate just on one question for you both. The question goes, what assurances do we have that the UDF will be implemented and upheld when the development occurs? So if the community says, okay, we realise we have cares and concerns, but let's go, what assurances do they have?
Might be Peter's best to...
Yeah, I can touch on that. Like, it's just to be honest about the process. Like, first of all, we have to get, like I outlined before, the number of steps that we have to go through before it's actually the UDF controls are part of the planning scheme. So until that happens, there's no real assurance that we can actually use these controls, but normally they get through. But the idea is we have to get council on board to adopt the final UDF first. So that's an important step. And then we have to go through that process. We have to be able to, withstand challenges, I guess, we have to consider submissions from different parties. It might be developers who want to go higher, or some people who are interested in heritage or labelled character may not want the controls to go as high as they're proposed. There'll be a whole stack of input into it. And then we have to convince the independent planning panel of the merits of what we're doing and get their support. And then eventually, yeah, if it gets approved by the minister at the end, it becomes part of the planning scheme. Then it's just their planning controls. So it's completely assured then. I suppose there's always discretion within decision making, but you will try to draft the controls so it's quite clear what the requirements are. But yeah, it's nothing's 100% certain in planning, unfortunately, until it's actually part of the scheme. And then even then, it's open to appeal to VCAT, for instance. But the clearer and the stronger the controls are, the more likely they're going to hold true as development occurs.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. If I could have that last slide, please, sweetie, that'd be fantastic. Okay, so a reminder about the neighbourhood chats, Saturday 27th of August, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m, Pakington Street, Waratah Street, Collins Street and Clonard Avenue. 2 p.m. to 3 p.m, Pakington Street, Waterloo Street, Anglesey Terrace, Maitland Street and Wellington Street. And then Sunday, 28th from 11 till 12, Pakington Street, Britannia Street, Isabella Street and Church Street. And also, plus take the survey, make the comments online at that address. I hope you have found this helpful, and don't forget to come along and walk and talks. They'll just be fun. They'll be a good opportunity to be together, to hear each other, to talk about things, and be in the actual area. So I think from everyone, good night. Thank you very much for coming along. Stay safe and stay well. Good night now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.